Belonging as a spiritual practice. On the way in today, up to Green Bay, I was reminded that it's that time of year again. Time for those fall pledge drives. I have a couple of nonprofit radio stations I listen to, and I found myself switching back and forth once they started their spiel. I'm like, okay, I don't want to deal with this. I want music, or I want to hear some news or something like that. And then I was thinking about it as I was writing this sermon actually this week, and their approach. Of course, they want to make me feel guilty for not contributing. And I do contribute, but I can't tell them that through the radio. So I have to feel guilty all again, over and over again, right? And then they often, it gets more and more desperate as the month goes on. And you get this statement at some point that says, what if we were no longer here? How much would it cost you to fill that empty hole in your life? I'm like, oh my Lord. And then they really hit me in my heart. They say, those expensive coffees you get that are like $6 and $7, if you gave up one of those a week, that might be $25 a month. And I'm like, oh, you got me. You got me. I guess that's what I have to do, right? And if you think about their approach, it's so transactional. It's always, we're giving you this service, we're giving you this song that you don't hear anywhere else, or we're giving you this news report that you can't get anywhere else. And so you need to pay for something for that privilege. It's you give, I pay, that kind of thing. And in honesty, what else are they supposed to do? It's not like an organization that I would join where I really feel like I belong, like it's a big family. You want to support your family, or maybe there's dues or something like that. It, at the end of the day, is purely a transaction. Okay, I have to pause here because suddenly I realize I'm the minister and I'm talking about fall pledge drives. I'm not backing into this. We don't do a fall pledge drive here. Especially for those of you that are new or visiting, you're probably going to get up and walk out the door. So don't worry, just relax, get into your seat, and if you're at home, that's okay. But I am going to ask you for something at the end of this sermon, and I'll tell it to you up front. I'm going to ask for a covenant of belonging as a spiritual practice. And that's a lot of words. And so I think I'm going to spend the next 15 minutes unpacking that to help you understand what I mean by that, because I'm going to ask you, you need to know what I'm asking, right? So a covenant of belonging to a spiritual practice. So let's take it apart, right? Let's start with belonging. I think we kind of know what belonging means, but let's just make sure we're all on the same page. So I actually found this interesting article that was in Forbes in January of 2021. Now, remember what was January of 2021? It was sort of the height of the pandemic. We couldn't go anywhere. We couldn't do anything. And we were all really missing each other. And we were getting really tired of only seeing each other on screens, right? And so they did this whole article about what's this all about? What does belonging really mean? And this is a little bit of their words. It says, belonging is a feeling of connectedness to a group or a community. It's a sense that you're part of something. You feel attached, close, and thoroughly accepted by your people. But then it goes on to say belonging is being more than part of a group. And so I thought about that phrase right there. What does it mean to be part of a group versus belonging? Think about fitting in versus belonging. So fitting in means you've figured out what that group's expectations are, and maybe it isn't exactly who you are, but you've figured out how to either hide part of yourself, don't say something, or just reinvent yourself. So when you're in that space, you fit in. But obviously that's probably not sustainable in the sense of belonging because you can't be who you really are. But try as they may, these nonprofits, I don't feel like this sense of belonging to these stations as well, because I don't feel accepted and like I can be who I am. We're kind of, they're on the radio and I'm driving the car kind of thing. So I went to a different site, Cornell University's diversity and inclusion department. They have a whole sense of belonging statement. Now, this was designed for a workplace, but I liked what they had to say. It said, belonging is the feeling of security and support when there's a sense of acceptance, inclusion, and identity for a member of a certain group. It is when an individual can bring their authentic self to work. Okay, so that description of belonging, I think, more accurately describes what our fellowships strive for. We hear it all the time from comments from new members or visitors that feel comfortable here. They often appreciate the ability to explore a spiritual path that feels right for them at that time in their lives. They don't have to hide it any longer. They don't have to worry that someone's going to tell them that they're going to hell or that whatever they have to say is dismissed. We have incredible spiritual diversity here, and we don't wear it on our sleeve. You can't see it, but if you start talking to people, you'll find out that everybody's path is different. And that's why I chose that reading today, that responsive reading, our religious pluralism, because it's essentially our 6 sources that somebody put an intro and a closing on. And just to remind you of all those 6 sources that are out there. And I have to laugh because it's not 6 sources, it's 6 clusters of sources. And it basically, it covers pretty much everything you could think of, with one exception. If I ruled the UUA, I would add a 7th source, which is just art. Now, it's implicitly in all of those things that there is art in all of those, but I think we should just call it out, because for me, visual arts, performing arts, music, in and of itself is a spiritual thing and helps me go deeper. So I'm just going to add that for those of you that are of like-minded nature. But on top of just spiritual diversity here, I think we, like society in general, we're recognizing more and more general diversity. And let me give you a couple of examples. Socioeconomic. You know, we're a lot more diverse than probably the old Unitarian Universalist churches in the mid-20th century. Cultural and family backgrounds. Neurodiversity. Neurodiversity is something that's talked about more. I think they finally came up with a good term to describe it. And what that means is that our brains work differently. It's just what it is. And being able to function together in a space, acknowledging that we just think differently. The next one, I think we all do, but we don't even think to call it diversity. And that is a preference for level and types of social engagement. If you haven't picked up on it, I'm an extreme extrovert. Okay, and so then there are those of you out there that are extreme introverts. And so we're at polar opposites, but I think this is a space where we and everybody in between us can coexist. And we do that all the time, I think, without thinking about it. And then finally, the one that comes up a lot, and in Green Bay, it was just Pride weekend. So it's sexuality, sexual preference, and gender identity is a lot of our diversity. So I want to make sure and make the statement clear. We welcome all of this diversity, and we want everyone to feel that this is a place they belong. And I have to digress for a second. Every time I say that, and every time I think about our fellowships, I can't help but think about the 1964 animated Christmas TV special, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, which still plays every year, and it's near and dear to my heart. Because that one part I just love, where they go visit the island of misfit toys. If there was ever a personification of the island of misfit toys, sometimes I think it's our fellowships. And I mean that in a very endearing way. So some of these toys, I have to tell you what it is. If you're not familiar with it, there's the cowboy who rides an ostrich. There's a train with square wheels on its caboose. There's a winged bear. And my favorite, because I suffer from the same thing, a kite that's afraid of heights. So it's all of these toys that they're wonderful toys. They just don't fit into the expectations of all the children of the world. So Santa has them on this island where they get along with each other and all of their diversity and have a really good time. So kidding aside, I think we are the brave folks in our communities who are willing to be ourselves and have religious beliefs and practices that don't often fit in easily into the world outside of our doors. Sometimes I think our fellowship feels like an oasis or an island of belonging instead of misfit toys. That's a better way to say it. So that's the term belonging. I'm going to move on to covenant. What is covenant? Covenant for me is the magic that makes all of this diversity work. People outside of Unitarian Universalism, those who really don't understand us and don't even want to try, often wonder how we can possibly function with all this diversity. And usually they're talking about religious diversity. And you'll hear things like, I'm sure you've all heard this, well, isn't that nice? You can believe anything you want there, can't you? Or, well, you don't really believe anything at all, do you? Right? And these comments come from people who don't understand that our beliefs aren't handed to us. And we have to work very, very hard for them. I don't think they understand that at all. We have one common belief, and that's that we are all on our own journey to understanding life's meaning and our orientation to the universe. And we have to go on those journeys ourselves to discover what's true for ourselves. Now, fortunately, we do that in community and support each other on those journeys. And that is the covenant part. The covenant is what makes it possible. Covenant is just a fancy word for promise, frankly. We're not a people of doctrine. We don't come together because we've all agreed to believe in the same exact thing. We come together because we're a people of covenant. We covenant to be there for each other. We celebrate diversity and support each other in our individual spiritual journeys. And frankly, we also covenant to behave. You can't be a jerk. We always need to assume the best of intentions. And when misunderstandings and conflicts arise, we promise to address them directly with openness and love. We promise to respect boundaries. And when things happen, we call that falling out of covenant. And it's our goal to be back in covenant with each other. Now, those of you that are new to Unitarian Universalism or didn't grow up in this faith, you may or may not know that what I just talked about in this idea of covenant didn't come about in the late 60s from a bunch of hippy dippies. This practice dates back to our earliest roots of Unitarianism in New England in 1600. So this whole idea of we are a community that goes down our separate paths, but we covenant with each other to support is written down in one of the covenants of the Massachusetts settlers back in 1630. Covenant example. There's a reading in our hymnal, number 471, arranged by Griswold Williams. And this is one for years and years and years. Many congregations just opened their services with this covenant, and everyone would say it together, so we were reminded of the covenant. And it goes like this. You've probably heard it. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest of truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, and to serve human need, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with the divine. Thus we do covenant with each other and with God. Now, nowadays, each fellowship has their own covenant, which addresses similar areas, and each often includes things like how to behave, how to have healthy relationships with each other, as well as to remember to support the fellowship both with volunteering and financially. So that's the covenant part. We've talked about belonging and covenant. So now let's talk about the spiritual practice, because what I'm asking for is to covenant to belonging as a spiritual practice. to talk about spiritual practice, of course, the first person who came to my mind was Brene Brown. I'm a big fan of Brene Brown, and I love her writings and her teachings and her TED Talks and pretty much everything about her. So she wrote an article called In Defining Spirituality. It was March of 2018. And in it, she says this: spirituality is recognizing and celebrating that we are all inextricably connected to each other by a power greater than all of us, and that our connection to that power and to one another is grounded in love and compassion. Practicing spirituality brings a sense of perspective, meaning, and purpose to our lives. So if there's anything I can say about Brene, she packs a lot in a few sentences. So I'm going to unpack that a little bit and repeat it here. So if she starts out with, what is spirituality? And she doesn't go at it from a purely orthodox religious perspective, although she is religious. I think she's Methodist. But she goes at it from almost this, she's a social scientist, if you don't know who she is. She does a lot of research on how people think and function. And so she goes at it from that point of view, like a scientist. Like, how would you talk about spirituality across everybody on the whole planet? So she says it's recognizing and celebrating that we are all inextricably, which I think basically means as close as possible in sort of in a mysterious way, connected to each other by a power greater than all of us, and that our connection to that power and one another is grounded in love and compassion. So she says over and over again in her work that she's found that human beings are hardwired for connection. From the moment we are born, we want to be connected to our parents, right? And so we seek this connection. We learn that love and compassion is probably the best way to get it. But after that, why does it work? And so she's saying that there's basically this power greater than we can understand that pulls us together, and that's called spirituality. And if you really lean into it, she says, it will bring you a sense of perspective, meaning, and purpose to our lives. And I think she just described what Unitarian Universalism is. And then her next statement is my favorite. She says, for some it's God, for someone else it's fishing. So in other words, she's wide open to whatever you think your spiritual practice needs to be able to come to this connection, that compassion, and that love, and just be vulnerable to a power greater than you. For some, it's God. For someone else, it's fishing. So I took what she said, and of course, I agree with it. I wouldn't have used it. But I have it, my own version. And for me, it's a little bit of a circular spiral. So let me take you on it for a second. I look at it this way. In order to deepen our spirituality, we need to seek out the connection we have by a power greater than ourselves. Pretty much what Brene said. And we do that by pursuing the perspectives and insights we find in our 6 sources, or our 6 clusters of sources. In other words, we're wide open to whatever inspires us. And we need to do this in a fellowship community of love, respect, and compassion. We do this by covenanting to support each other and to hang in there when the going gets tough, even when we may not agree with each other, and even when we drive each other crazy. All of this creates the ever deepening and stronger sense of belonging. Belonging, then, is both a comfort and a responsibility. Who doesn't enjoy that feeling of belonging? You feel relaxed. You feel like, these are my people. They get me. Here we are. I can just be myself. So that's the comfort part. And then the responsibility part. We need to show up. Be willing to listen and explore. Be willing, frankly, to be vulnerable, and be willing to hold a safe place for others to be vulnerable. This isn't a transaction. You don't come here on a certain day when you think the value is worth it, right? This is part of belonging. You need to show up, listen and explore, and be vulnerable. I thought of an example lately, and I kind of want to close with that. You don't know this, but behind the scenes, I take attendance at all 3 fellowships all Sunday. There's people locally who do the work, and then I kind of bring it all together, including all the Zoom folks. And there's a trend that has really kind of settled down since post-COVID, in that if a fellowship is hosting, their attendance is significantly higher than when they're not hosting, when they're watching it on the screen. And so I just want to address that for a minute, because your covenant is to support the community, not the speaker. I mean, it's nice if you show up because I'm there, but that's not the point. I know you're there whether I see you in front of me or out in Zoom, and you're not. It's what I've also found is it's not, people are not going out to Zoom instead, they're just not showing up. And so I get complaints, and I hear it and I get it, about coming together just to watch it on a screen. But stop and think about that a second. That's different for us. That's different for churches to get used to watching the part of the service on the screen. But then we break out into a fellowship time where we're with each other and we do what we've always done. And this is not unusual in society. Have you heard of these things called Packer games and the Super Bowl? Every Sunday, lots and lots of people get together with their family and friends and cheer on a team. And I'm pretty sure they're not in your living room playing that game. You're watching it for 3 hours and 15 minutes on a screen virtually, but yet you're supporting each other in your camaraderie for sports. And I would say March Madness is probably the same thing. But there's other things. You've done it, I'm sure. Movies, TED Talks, documentaries, TV shows, political debates and speeches. It's the same thing. For decades, probably since television was invented, we've been getting together to watch something virtually as a community. And this is really no different than that. In fact, it's better than that because we organize it and we have structure and things like that. So that's just one example, but it's the one that's the most pressing lately. So I'm actually asking you now, this is sort of like an altar call, but we won't do it quite that way. Do you covenant to belonging as a spiritual practice? This is the essence of Unitarian Universalism. Do you renew your covenant to belong with the others of your fellowship, to deepen your spiritual practice and support others on their journeys as well? I hope you do, and may we all be blessed by our covenant. Amen.